At 2:07 on a Tuesday morning, my phone lit up with a message that destroyed 23 years of marriage in less than 15 words. It wasn't from a stranger. It wasn't from a scammer. It was from my husband. "I ran away with your best friend. We're never coming back." There was a photo attached. The two of them stood barefoot on a beach in Angra dos Reis, with champagne glasses raised toward the camera, as if they had just won the lottery. My husband smiled wider than I had seen him smile in years. My best friend leaned against him wearing the necklace I had given her for her 45th birthday. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I replied with only 2 words: "Good luck." Then I cancelled every card, changed every lock, and quietly went to bed. The next morning, the first people knocking on my front door weren't my husband or my former best friend. They were the police. My name is Livia Hartmann. I'm 45 years old, and until that Tuesday, I believed I understood exactly what my life looked like. I worked as a senior accountant for a regional logistics company outside Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais. My days revolved around spreadsheets, quarterly reports, and helping small business owners untangle financial disasters. Numbers rarely lied. People did. Ironically, I had forgotten that last lesson inside my own home. Our brick house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac lined with ipay trees that turned brilliant shades of yellow and pink every autumn. Children rode bicycles in the evenings. Neighbors waved while walking their dogs. It wasn't a wealthy neighborhood, but it was peaceful, and every mortgage payment had been made on time because I insisted on planning our finances carefully. The house was legally mine. Most people didn't know that. When Mateus and I married 23 years earlier, my grandmother had helped me buy the property before the wedding. Later, Mateus moved in after we married. We renovated together. We built memories together. But legally, the deed never changed. Neither did the investment accounts my father had left me after his passing. Those decisions had never mattered before until they mattered more than anything. Mateus Hartmann was 48, charming when he wanted to be, funny enough to make a room like him, and persuasive enough to convince people that every setback was temporary. He owned a small construction company that had done well for years before projects started drying up. Whenever money became tight, I covered the difference. I told myself that was what marriage meant. You carried each other. At least that's what I believed. Fernanda Costa had been my closest friend since college. We survived terrible apartments together, impossible professors, broken hearts, weddings, miscarriages, promotions, funerals, birthdays, and every ordinary Tuesday in between. She knew every secret I'd ever trusted another human being with. When Mateus forgot our anniversary, Fernanda reminded him. When I was overwhelmed at work, Fernanda brought dinner. When my mother died, Fernanda stayed in my guest room for nearly a week. She wasn't just family. She felt safer than family, which explained why the photograph from Angra dos Reis hurt more than I thought anything ever could. I stared at the image for nearly a minute after replying, not because I hoped it wasn't real, because I noticed details. The hotel bracelet around Mateus's wrist, the expensive sunglasses Fernanda wore, the ocean behind them, the champagne, none of it had been paid for with their money. It couldn't have been. I knew exactly how much remained in Mateus's business account. I knew exactly which credit cards they carried. I also knew which cards were connected to my accounts. That realization settled over me like cold rain. I opened my banking app. 3 supplementary credit cards appeared beneath my primary account. Mine, Mateus's, Fernanda's emergency card. Years earlier, Fernanda had borrowed one during an overseas trip after her wallet had been stolen. She'd eventually returned it, but I'd forgotten to remove her authorization because she never used it again. Or so I thought. I opened the transaction history. Hotel in Angra dos Reis, luxury resort dining, private yacht charter, designer boutique, spa, thousands of reais, charge after charge after charge. My pulse never sped up. Instead, it slowed. That frightened me more than panic would have, because when I became completely calm, I usually made permanent decisions. I called the credit card company. "Good evening," the representative answered cheerfully. "I need to cancel every supplementary card immediately. May I ask why?" "Because the authorized users no longer have my authorization." She processed the request in less than 5 minutes. Every card became useless. Next came online banking, passwords, security questions, 2-factor authentication, wire transfer permissions. I changed everything. Then I searched for a 2-4-hour locksmith. The dispatcher sounded surprised. "You need every lock changed tonight. Every single one." An hour later, a gray pickup truck pulled into my driveway. The locksmith was probably 60 with tired eyes and rough hands. He looked at the house, then at me. "Everything okay, ma'am?" "No," I answered honestly, "but it will be." He never asked another question. For nearly 2 hours, the sound of drills echoed through my quiet neighborhood. Front door, garage entry, back patio, basement entrance, every old lock disappeared into a bucket beside his truck. Every new key landed in my palm. When he finished, he handed me 3 copies. "You want extras?" "No." "You sure?" "I don't think I'll be trusting many people after tonight." He nodded with the kind of understanding that comes only from someone who has seen too many marriages end. After he drove away, I walked through the silent house. Nothing looked different. The photographs remained on the walls. Mateus's reading chair still sat beside the fireplace. Fernanda's favorite coffee mug was still in my kitchen cabinet because she'd practically lived here during football season. Yet, the house felt different, lighter, as if it finally belonged to the person whose name had always been on the paperwork. I slept nearly 6 uninterrupted hours. That surprised me. I expected nightmares. Instead, exhaustion won. At exactly 7:18 Wednesday morning, violent pounding rattled the front door. Not knocking, pounding. 3 heavy blows. Then another. I slipped on my robe and walked calmly toward the entrance. For one brief second, I assumed Mateus had discovered his cards no longer worked. Maybe he'd come home angry. Maybe he'd come begging. Maybe both. I looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my porch, one older, one younger. Neither looked angry, but both looked serious. I unlocked the new deadbolt, leaving the security chain in place. The older officer removed his hat. "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning. Are you Olivia Hartman?" "Yes." He exchanged a glance with his partner before speaking again. "Mrs. Hartman, we've received a complaint from your husband." He paused. "And we need to ask you a few questions." The older officer waited patiently while I removed the security chain and opened the door the rest of the way. "I'm Officer Mendez," he said, extending a hand. "This is Officer Silva." I shook both hands. "Would you like to come in? We would appreciate that." Their eyes briefly swept across the entryway. They noticed the fresh deadbolt, the clean hallway, and probably the faint smell of sawdust left behind by the locksmith. Neither commented. I led them into the living room where morning sunlight spilled through the bay window onto hardwood floors Mateus and I had refinished together almost 15 years earlier. For a fleeting moment, I remembered him laughing as he accidentally splashed stain across his jeans. The memory disappeared as quickly as it came. Officer Mendez remained standing. "I'm afraid your husband contacted local authorities early this morning. He claims you've locked him out of the marital residence, frozen his access to family finances, and illegally taken control of jointly owned assets." His tone wasn't accusatory. It was procedural. I folded my hands calmly. "I see." Officer Silva studied my face. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," Officer Mendez continued. "Mr. Hartman says he attempted to purchase airline tickets home this morning, but every credit card was declined. He also claims you emptied the accounts." "I didn't empty anything." "So, you did cancel the cards?" "Yes." Officer Mendez gave a slow nod. "Can you explain why?" Instead of answering immediately, I walked into my home office. I'd always believed important conversations deserved documents, not emotions. Inside, a gray filing cabinet sat neatly labeled folders arranged alphabetically. Home, insurance, retirement, property, banking. I returned carrying 3 folders and placed them carefully on the dining room table. Officer Silva exchanged another glance with his partner. "I thought you might ask questions," I said. Officer Mendez opened the first folder. The property deed. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "This house belongs to me." He read the date. "Purchased 6 months before your marriage." "Correct." "And Mr. Hartman was never added to the title." "No." Officer Silva quietly read over his shoulder. Neither officer said anything for several seconds. Officer Mendez closed the folder. "Mr. Hartman described this as our house. It was our home." I chose my words carefully. Legally, those aren't always the same thing. The second folder contained investment records, retirement accounts, and beneficiary documents. Everything predated my marriage. Everything remained in my name. Officer Silva finally spoke. "So, these accounts also belong to you?" "They're not joint accounts." "No." "What about the credit cards?" "They're attached to my accounts." Mateus had an authorized user card. Officer Mendez leaned back slightly. "So, canceling them was my legal right." He nodded once. I believe it was. Silence settled across the room. Outside, Someone pushed a stroller along the sidewalk. A lawnmower started somewhere down the block. Ordinary Wednesday morning sounds. Inside my dining room, 23 years of marriage were quietly being reduced to paperwork. Officer Mendez closed the final folder. "Mrs. Hartman, may I ask what happened?" I reached for my phone. Without saying a word, I opened the message Mateus had sent 8 hours earlier. Then I handed it across the table. Officer Mendez adjusted his reading glasses. Officer Silva leaned closer. Neither officer spoke while they read. The photograph lingered on the screen. Mateus, Fernanda, Champagne, Angra dos Reis. Finally, Officer Silva exhaled softly. "So," he looked almost embarrassed, "they actually sent you this at 2 this morning." Officer Mendez returned the phone. "I understand why you changed the locks." I offered a small smile. "I thought you might." He hesitated. "Mr. Hartman neglected to mention this part." "I'm sure he did." The older officer looked around the room again. "Did he ever threaten you?" "No." "Did he ever become violent?" "No." "Then why change every lock instead of just asking him not to come home?" I looked toward the front door, because he already told me he wasn't coming home. Officer Mendez nodded slowly. "Fair point." Officer Silva shifted in his chair. "What about the money? He insists you drained the accounts." "I transferred nothing from any account that belonged to him." "You only removed access?" "Exactly. Would you mind showing us?" I logged into my online banking account. The screen filled with balances, transactions, authorized users. Officer Silva watched quietly. Everything was still there. Nothing had disappeared. Officer Mendez pointed toward the transaction history. "Would you scroll back?" I did. Hotel charges, restaurants, luxury shopping, spa services, boat excursion, every expense had occurred in Angra dos Reis. Every expense had been charged against supplementary cards connected to my primary account. Officer Silva frowned. "When did these begin?" I kept scrolling. "Monday afternoon, Monday evening, Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon." The charges had started before Mateus even sent his dramatic message, as though he'd assumed I'd never notice. Officer Mendez rubbed his chin. "Looks like they were enjoying themselves." "I suppose so." Then something caught my eye. A transfer. $8, unknown recipient. The timestamp showed 3 weeks earlier. I frowned. "That's strange." Officer Mendez looked up. "What is it?" "I don't remember authorizing this." I clicked. Another transfer appeared. $6, then another, $4.5. Different dates, different amounts. Always approved electronically. Always from my account. A cold pressure settled across my chest. "I'm sorry." I leaned closer to the monitor. "I've never seen these." Officer Silva stepped beside me. "You didn't make them." "No." My accounting instincts took over immediately. Ignore emotion. Follow numbers. I filtered transactions by electronic transfers. The screen populated with dozens of entries. Some small, some surprisingly large. None looked familiar. Officer Mendez quietly observed, "How often do you review these?" "Monthly, and you never noticed." "I review statements." I clicked another tab, but these were hidden among routine business reimbursements. I opened the recipient details. Several accounts, different banks, different names. The total climbed higher with every calculation running through my head. Nearly $40 gone. Not overnight. Over almost 11 months, my breathing remained steady. Years of accounting had trained me well. Panic later. Evidence first. Officer Silva looked concerned. "Mrs. Hartman, I think my husband has been stealing from me." Neither officer interrupted. I continued opening records, transfer after transfer. Some referenced construction materials, others consulting fees. Several had no explanation whatsoever. Officer Mendez finally spoke. "You should contact your bank immediately." "I will. And probably an attorney. I know one." His expression softened. "For what it's worth, this appears to be much larger than a marital disagreement." "I agree." Officer Mendez closed his notebook. "I'm documenting exactly what we've seen today." Officer Silva added quietly, "There doesn't appear to be any criminal issue regarding the locks or the cards." "I didn't think there would be." Officer Mendez stood. "If Mr. Hartman attempts to force entry into this house, call us immediately." "I will. If anyone threatens you, I'll call." He offered one final look around the room. "I'm sorry your morning started this way." I smiled politely. My morning actually started at 2:07. For the first time, Officer Mendez almost smiled back. After they left, I locked the front door. Not because I was afraid, because habits mattered. The house became silent again. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop. pulled every financial record from the previous year. By noon, my dining room table had disappeared beneath stacks of statements, tax documents, wire confirmations, and credit card summaries. The deeper I looked, the worse everything became. This wasn't an impulsive affair. This had been planned, funded, carefully hidden, and somehow I had balanced everyone else's books while failing to notice someone had been quietly rewriting my own life. I reached for my phone. One name came immediately to mind. Clara Mendez, the best financial litigation attorney I'd ever worked with. She answered on the second ring. Clara Mendez. It's Livia Hartman. A brief pause. Livia, you sound different. I need a lawyer. Another pause. Then her voice became all business. What happened? I stared at the latest unauthorized transfer glowing on my computer screen. My husband ran away with my best friend and I think he may have committed fraud. There was complete silence. Then Clara spoke 6 words that changed everything. Don't touch another single document. Clara Mendez arrived at my house just after 3 that afternoon carrying nothing more than a leather briefcase and a legal pad. She didn't waste time with sympathy. That was one of the reasons I had called her, instead of anyone else. She set her briefcase on my dining room table, now buried beneath bank statements, receipts, tax documents, and handwritten notes. You've already done half my job, she said as she looked over the piles. I've spent 20 years finding accounting errors. She gave me a faint smile. Then today, let's find something even more valuable. The truth. The evidence. For the next 3 hours, neither of us talked very much. We worked. Clara reviewed every unauthorized transfer while I traced each payment back through my bookkeeping software. Whenever we found something unusual, she marked it with a yellow tab. Soon, the table looked like a sea of yellow paper. Look at this, she finally said. She slid 3 statements toward me. At first, they looked unrelated. One payment had gone to a luxury apartment complex downtown. Another had been wired to a luxury car dealership. The third was labeled only as consulting services. Different dates, different recipients, different amounts. What do they have in common? I asked. Clara turned the pages around. The receiving bank. I stared for several seconds. Every payment had ended in the same 4 account numbers. So, she nodded. They're all feeding the same account. I felt my stomach tighten. You think Mateus opened another account? I think Mateus opened one he never wanted you to see. We requested additional transaction details through my bank. Because I was the account owner, they agreed to provide everything connected to the outgoing transfers. While we waited, Clara asked another question. Tell me about Fernanda. The name felt strange now, as if it belonged to someone I had never actually known. We met in college. You trusted her with everything. Did she ever borrow money? No. Did she ever have financial problems? I paused. Not until about a year ago. Clara looked up. What happened? She lost her marketing job. I remembered comforting Fernanda over coffee. She had cried. She worried she would lose her condo. She said she couldn't sleep. I had believed every word. So that's when Mateus started helping her, Clara asked. I assumed he was just being kind. Clara wrote something on her legal pad. Or they were already planning this. The sentence hung in the air. I wanted to reject it immediately. Instead, another memory surfaced. Fernanda suddenly driving a newer SUV. Designer handbags she joked she'd found on sale. Weekend trips she could somehow afford despite being unemployed. I had accepted every explanation because I trusted the person giving it. Trust, I realized, had been my blind spot. My phone buzzed. The bank. The representative emailed the expanded transfer records while staying on the line. I opened the file. Clara moved beside me. There it was. Every outgoing transfer, every destination account, every authorization code, and something neither of us expected. Clara leaned closer. Livia, I see it. The authorization wasn't mine. The system showed electronic signatures, but the IP address attached to each approval originated from Mateus's office. Not our home, his office. I clicked another record. Same thing, another same result. Clara slowly closed the laptop. This just became much more serious. You think he forged my authorization? I think he intentionally created the appearance that you approved transfers you never saw. I looked across the room toward the family photograph still sitting on the bookshelf. One picture showed Mateus and me celebrating our 20th anniversary. Another included Fernanda standing between us laughing. The 3 of us looked like people who would always trust each other. Appearances I thought could survive long after the truth had disappeared. Clara broke the silence. There's more. She opened one of the supporting documents. This apartment downtown. What about it? It isn't rented under Mateus's name. I frowned. Fernanda. Clara nodded. The lease belongs to Vanessa Fernanda Costa. My chest tightened. So, I've been paying her rent. It appears that way. We continued following the money. Furniture store, insurance payments, utility deposits, even grocery deliveries. Piece by piece, a second life emerged from the paperwork. Not a spontaneous affair, a carefully financed escape, one that had been built with my money. I leaned back in my chair. I kept thinking the affair was the betrayal. Clara folded her hands. It wasn't. It was the cover. She nodded once. Exactly. As evening settled outside, we ordered takeout. Neither of us touched until it had gone cold. The more we uncovered, the less hungry I became. Near 7, another notification arrived. This time from my email account. An automatic security alert. Someone had attempted to log into my cloud storage from Angra dos Reis. The attempt had failed because I had changed every password the previous night. Clara looked at the screen. They're looking for something. My financial files or your tax records? Maybe both. I suddenly remembered something else. My digital signature. Clara looked at me sharply. What about it? Mateus insisted. Did I scan it years ago? He said it would make business paperwork easier whenever I was traveling. Where was it stored? I pointed toward an old external hard drive sitting in my desk drawer. Clara didn't say a word. She connected it to my laptop. Folders appeared. Taxes, insurance, photos, estate planning. Then another folder. Business. I frowned. I've never opened that one. Inside were dozens of PDF files, contracts, loan applications, vendor agreements. Many carried what looked like my electronic signature, except I had never seen most of them. Clara read silently for several minutes before speaking. Livia. Her voice had changed. This isn't just unauthorized spending anymore. I looked at her. What is it? I believe your husband used your signature on financial documents without your knowledge. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the kitchen windows. I closed my eyes for only a moment, not because I wanted to escape, because I needed one steady breath before facing whatever came next. When I opened them again, Clara was already organizing the evidence into separate folders. Fraud, unauthorized transfers, false authorizations, possible forged signatures. She looked at me with the calm confidence of someone who had walked into difficult courtrooms for 20 years. Starting now, she said, "You do not answer Mateus's calls. I wasn't planning to. You don't answer Fernanda either. I won't. If either of them comes here, I call the police." She nodded. And if they apologize, I surprised myself by smiling. They're welcome to apologize. Clara waited. But they'll do it through their attorneys. She smiled for the first time that day. Good. She packed the files into a briefcase, leaving copies neatly stacked on my dining room table. Before reaching the front door, she stopped. I have one piece of advice. I'm listening. People who think they've gotten away with everything almost always make one final mistake. What kind of mistake? They come back. I watched her drive away through the rain. The house was quiet again. For the first time since receiving Mateus's message from Angra dos Reis, I wasn't wondering whether he'd return. I knew he would. He simply had no idea that when he did, I wouldn't be waiting with tears. I'd be waiting with evidence. Clara's prediction took less than 48 hours to come true. Saturday afternoon was unusually warm for early spring. I was trimming the rose bushes along the front walkway when a taxi slowed to a stop in front of my house. I recognized Mateus before he even stepped out. The confidence he'd worn in the Angra dos Reis photograph was gone. His polo shirt was wrinkled. His beard had grown in unevenly, and the expensive sunglasses he had proudly worn on the beach were nowhere to be found. Fernanda climbed out after him. She carried 2 oversized suitcases and a designer handbag I had unknowingly paid for. Even from 30 feet away, I could see the tension between them. They weren't speaking. So much for paradise. I quietly set the pruning shears on the porch and walked inside before either of them reached the front steps. 3 firm knocks echoed through the house. Then Mateus's voice. "Livia." I didn't answer. Another knock. "Livia, I know you're home." Only then did I unlock the door, keeping the security latch in place. Mateus forced a smile. "There you are." I looked at him calmly. "What do you need?" His smile disappeared. "My cards aren't working." "I know. We've been trying to reach you." "I know. You changed the locks." "Yes." Fernanda stepped forward. "You've made your point." I looked at her for the first time since Angra dos Reis. "No, Fernanda, I haven't." She folded her arms. "We just want to come inside and talk." You told me you were never coming back. Mateus sighed dramatically. We said a lot of things. No. I corrected him. You texted exactly 3 sentences. He rubbed the back of his neck. Can we not do this outside? No. The silence stretched long enough for a neighbor across the street to glance toward us while collecting her mail. Mateus lowered his voice. The hotel froze our reservation. I'm sorry to hear that. Our accounts aren't working. I know. We've been living out of suitcases for 2 days. I know. His patience cracked. Livia, stop saying I know. I know because I cancelled the cards. Fernanda took another step. You had no right. I couldn't help smiling. I had every right. She laughed sarcastically. Everything Mateus has belongs to both of you. Actually, I tilted my head slightly. The bank disagrees. Mateus's jaw tightened. We're married. We are. So, half of everything is mine. I looked directly into his eyes. Then your attorney should have no trouble proving that. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Fernanda finally broke the silence. We just need enough money to get back on our feet. I almost laughed. My retirement savings weren't meant to finance your honeymoon. It wasn't a honeymoon. No, you don't understand. I understand exactly what you told me. I reached into the entryway cabinet and removed a large manila envelope Clara had prepared the previous evening. What is that? Mateus asked. I slid it through the narrow opening in the door. He opened it. His face slowly lost color. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Request for temporary financial injunction. Motion to preserve assets. Clara had moved fast. Very fast. You already filed. I did. You didn't even talk to me. You announced the end of our marriage from a beach. Fernanda glanced over Mateus's shoulder. What does that mean? He swallowed hard. It means she's freezing everything. I nodded. Every account connected to me. His eyes widened. My business will continue using the accounts legally registered to your company. He stared at me. You knew. I know a great deal more now than I did 3 days ago. A flicker of panic crossed his face. What does that mean? It means Clara has been very busy. Fernanda suddenly looked nervous. Who's Clara? My attorney. Mateus took one quick step toward the door. You hired a lawyer. I hired the right lawyer. His breathing changed. It wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. He realized this wasn't an emotional argument. It was becoming a legal case. Fernanda grabbed his arm. Let's just get our things. I nodded toward the garage. They're already packed. Both of them turned. The boxes sat neatly stacked beneath the covered driveway. Every shirt, every pair of shoes, every jacket, every kitchen gadget they'd purchased together. Nothing damaged, nothing thrown away. Simply packed with the same care I'd once used while wrapping Christmas presents. Fernanda frowned. You packed all this? I had time. Mateus walked slowly toward the boxes. He picked up one labeled office, another labeled winter clothes, a third read family photos. He opened it. The framed pictures were individually wrapped in newspaper. He looked back at me. You left the pictures. They belong to your memories too. For the first time since arriving, guilt briefly appeared on his face. It vanished almost immediately. Livia, his voice softened. We made a mistake. I said nothing. We can fix this. No, I never meant to hurt you. You didn't plan to get caught. His shoulders slumped. Fernanda looked irritated. Mateus. He ignored her. I'll end it. I studied him carefully. With Fernanda? Yes. Fernanda's head snapped toward him. What? He didn't look at her. I'll come home. The words hung in the air. Not because they were convincing, because they arrived far too late. I shook my head slowly. You didn't leave because you were confused. You left because you believed I'd always be here. He opened his mouth again. Before another word could leave it, 2 patrol cars turned onto my street. Blue lights flashed silently. Fernanda stiffened. Mateus, I know. Officer Mendez stepped out of the first cruiser. Officer Silva followed behind him. They both recognized me immediately. Officer Mendez approached calmly. Good afternoon, Mrs. Hartman. Good afternoon. He looked toward Mateus. Mr. Hartman. Mateus forced a smile. I wasn't causing trouble. Officer Mendez remained expressionless. We received a report that someone was attempting to enter a residence after being instructed not to. I wasn't forcing my way in. No. The officer nodded. But you've been asked to leave. Mateus looked at me. You called them? Yes. Officer Silva stepped beside the stacked boxes. Looks like your belongings have already been prepared. Fernanda whispered something under her breath. Officer Mendez continued. Mr. Hartman, Unless Mrs. Hartman invites you inside, you need to remain off the property. We're still married. Officer Mendez nodded. And this property is currently titled solely in Mrs. Hartman's name. Mateus stared. How do you know that? We've already reviewed the documentation. His face went completely pale. The confidence he had carried into Angra dos Reis finally disappeared. Fernanda looked back and forth between us. This is unbelievable. No, I said quietly. This is paperwork. Officer Mendez waited while Mateus loaded the final box into the taxi before closing the trunk. Mateus turned toward me one last time. This isn't over. I met his eyes without raising my voice. I know, but next time. I glanced briefly toward Officer Mendez. Bring your attorney. The taxi pulled away without another word. I stood on my porch until it disappeared around the corner. Officer Mendez approached before returning to his cruiser. Everything okay? For the first time in days. I took a slow breath. I think it will be. He nodded. I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again. So do I. As the patrol cars drove away, my phone vibrated. A new email from Clara. The subject line contained only 5 words. They've officially responded. Court date scheduled. I opened the attachment. 4 weeks. In exactly 4 weeks, everything Mateus had tried to hide would become part of the public record. The courthouse looked exactly the way I remembered from years earlier, when I had testified in a routine business dispute on behalf of my company. Greystone, metal detectors, quiet conversations, people pretending they weren't nervous. This time I wasn't there as an accountant reviewing someone else's mistakes. I was there because my husband had spent nearly a year stealing from me while convincing the world he was the victim. Clara met me outside the courtroom carrying 2 organized trial binders. Every document had color-coded tabs. You look calm, she said. I am calm. She handed me a bottle of water. Don't volunteer information. Answer only what's asked. Let the documents do the talking. That had become our strategy. Facts over emotion, evidence over outrage. As we entered the courtroom, Mateus was already seated beside his attorney. He wore a navy suit I had bought for him on our 20th anniversary. Fernanda sat 1 row behind him. She avoided looking at me. For the first time since Angra dos Reis, she looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. Whatever fantasy they had imagined had clearly collapsed long before today. Mateus looked confident. Too confident. His attorney, Marcos Lima, stood and greeted Clara with a polite handshake. Good morning. Morning, Marcos. I hear you've built quite a case. Clara smiled faintly. I've simply organized the truth. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Eleonora Whitaker entered, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and an expression that discouraged unnecessary speeches. Everyone stood, then we sat. Mr. Lima spoke first. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about a marriage that ended badly. My client made poor personal decisions, but Mrs. Hartman reacted by financially destroying him. She froze assets, denied access to marital resources, and acted out of revenge rather than necessity. He spoke smoothly, confidently. If I hadn't lived through the past month, I might have believed him. When he finished, the judge turned toward Clara. Miss Mendez, Clara stood. This case is not about a broken marriage. She paused deliberately. It's about financial deception. She placed the first binder before the judge. My client did not remove assets from Mr. Hartman. She opened the binder. She protected assets that legally belonged to her after discovering they had been used without her knowledge. Judge Whitaker nodded. Proceed. Clara projected the first exhibit onto the courtroom screen. The Angra dos Reis photograph, then Mateus's text message. I ran away with your best friend. We're never coming back. No one spoke. Clara clicked again. Credit card statements appeared. Hotel charges, restaurants, luxury shopping, private excursions. Each charge highlighted, each connected to my account. She didn't dramatize anything. She simply read dates and amounts. The silence became heavier with every slide. Then came the bank transfers, one after another. Apartment lease payments, vehicle deposits, insurance premiums, furniture purchases. Fernanda slowly lowered her head. Clara continued. These transfers originated from accounts solely owned by Mrs. Hartman. She displayed the authorization logs. The approvals appear to bear Mrs. Hartman's electronic signature. Another click. IP addresses. Every authorization originated from Mateus's office. Not my home, not my workplace, his office. Judge Whitaker leaned forward. Mr. Lima, the attorney adjusted his glasses. My client acknowledges making transfers. Clara interrupted gently. With permission, Lima hesitated. We maintain there was implied marital consent. Clara walked to the evidence table. I'd like to call Mr. Hartman. Mateus took the witness stand. He looked composed. Clara approached slowly. Mr. Hartman, did your wife know about the apartment leased under Miss Fernanda Costa's name? No. Did she authorize you to pay that lease? No. Did she know you used her account to do so? No. The courtroom remained silent. Clara didn't raise her voice. Were you having a relationship with Miss Costa at that time? Mateus swallowed. Yes. And you used your wife's money to support that relationship? He hesitated. Yes. A quiet murmur spread through the gallery. Clara waited until the room settled. Mr. Hartman, did your wife ever authorize these transfers in writing? No. Verbally? No. Did you tell the bank she had approved them? He looked toward his attorney. Judge Whittaker answered for him. You'll answer the question. Yes. Clara nodded once. No further questions. The judge turned toward Mr. Lima. Redirect. He stood but looked noticeably less certain. No questions. Fernanda was called next. She walked to the witness stand without looking at me. Clara spoke kindly. Miss Costa, did you know where the money came from? Fernanda's fingers tightened around the armrest. At first, she stopped. At first, Mateus said they shared everything, and later, I found out it was Livia's. When she closed her eyes briefly, about 3 months before Angra dos Reis. Clara paused. Yet, you continued accepting payments, Fernanda whispered. Yes. Mateus turned sharply toward her. You said we weren't talking about that. Judge Whittaker immediately intervened. Mr. Hartman, you'll remain silent, Fernanda continued. I asked him several times if he was going to tell Livia, and he kept saying there'd be plenty left that she'd never notice. For the first time that morning, Mateus looked genuinely frightened. Clara displayed one final exhibit, the recovered email folder. Inside were contracts containing my electronic signature. Clara addressed the judge. A forensic document examiner reviewed these files. She handed over the report. The electronic signature was copied from a previously authorized tax document and reused without Mrs. Hartman's knowledge. Judge Whittaker spent several minutes reading. No one spoke. The only sound in the courtroom came from papers turning. Finally, she looked directly at Mateus. Mr. Hartman. He slowly stood. This court was initially asked to resolve a marital property dispute. She placed the report on the bench. What I now see is evidence suggesting possible financial fraud and unauthorized use of another person's identity. The room became perfectly still. Judge Whittaker continued. The civil issues before this court are straightforward. She looked toward me. The residence remains the sole property of Mrs. Hartman. She turned to Mateus. The disputed accounts belong to Mrs. Hartman. Another pause. The unauthorized transfers appear undisputed. She signed several pages. The court orders immediate reimbursement of recoverable marital funds, affirms the temporary financial injunction, and grants Mrs. Hartman exclusive possession of the residence pending final dissolution. Mateus's shoulders dropped, but the judge wasn't finished. She lifted the forensic report once more. This court is referring these additional findings to the appropriate investigative authorities. Mr. Lima closed his eyes briefly. He knew exactly what that meant. Clara quietly squeezed my arm beneath the counsel table, not in celebration, in reassurance. As the hearing concluded, Mateus finally looked at me. For weeks, I had imagined that moment. I expected anger, maybe regret. Instead, I saw confusion, as though he genuinely couldn't understand how everything had unraveled so completely. The answer had never been complicated. It wasn't Angra dos Reis. It wasn't Fernanda. It wasn't even the affair. It was the moment he convinced himself that the truth would stay buried forever. As the bailiff announced the hearing adjourned, Clara gathered our binders. Outside the courtroom, she allowed herself one small smile. The hardest part is over. I looked back through the courtroom doors as Mateus remained seated beside his attorney. No, I said quietly. For him, it's only beginning. 3 months after the hearing, the house felt quieter than it ever had before. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. Empty is what I felt in those first few days after Mateus left, when I still expected to hear his keys hit the bowl by the front door, or Fernanda's laugh drifting in from the kitchen like she still belonged there. Quiet came later after the shock had faded, and the room stopped waiting for people who no longer deserved to enter them. By June, I had changed more than the locks. I changed the curtains in the bedroom. I donated the oversized recliner Mateus had claimed as his throne in the living room. I took down every photograph that made me feel like a fool for trusting what had been standing beside me. Then slowly I put up new ones, A picture of my sister and how's that? Lagoa da Pampulha, both of us windblown and laughing. A framed watercolor from a local art fair. A photo of my mother holding me when I was 5. Nothing dramatic, nothing expensive. Just proof that my life had existed before Matthias Hartmann and would continue after him. The divorce finalized on a Tuesday afternoon in a small conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. Matthias sat across from me with his attorney, thinner than I remembered, his suit hanging differently on his shoulders. Fernanda was not there. She had left him sometime after the fraud referral became real. According to Clara, she was cooperating with investigators in exchange for her own protection. I didn't ask for details. There are some things you stop wanting to know, because knowing them won't give you peace. The final agreement was simple. The house remained mine. My retirement accounts remained mine. Matthias was ordered to repay a substantial portion of what he had taken through the sale of business assets and structured payments monitored by the court. His construction company, already unstable, collapsed under the weight of unpaid vendors in the investigation. I did not smile when Clara explained it. I did not celebrate when the judge signed the final decree. I simply breathed. For 23 years, I had thought marriage meant carrying the heavy things together. What I had not understood was that Matthias had slowly handed me every burden and called it partnership. After the papers were signed, he followed me into the courthouse hallway. Livia. I stopped, but did not turn immediately. Clara remained beside me. Matthias looked at her. Can I speak to my wife alone? Ex-wife, Clara corrected. The word landed cleanly. Ex-wife, not wife, not partner, not the woman waiting at home, while he built a second life with her money. I finally faced him. You can speak here. His mouth tightened, but he nodded. I know you hate me. I don't. That surprised him. Maybe it surprised me, too. Hate required a kind of closeness I no longer felt. He looked down at his hands. I ruined everything. Yes, I was stupid. No, I kept my voice calm. Stupid is forgetting an anniversary. Stupid is buying the wrong paint color. What you did was deliberate. He flinched. For a moment, the man in front of me looked less like a villain and more like someone who had finally reached the end of his own excuses. I don't know how I became that person, he said. I believed him. Not because he was innocent, because some people destroy their lives, one small justification at a time, and only recognize themselves when the damage is too large to hide. I hope you figure it out, I said. He looked up. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I thought about the Angra dos Reis message, Fernanda's necklace, the bank transfers, the forged signatures, the police on my porch, the courtroom. Then I thought about the quiet house waiting for me with sunlight falling through new curtains I had chosen myself. I already stopped letting you live inside my head, I said. That's all I can offer. His eyes teared. I didn't stay to watch the tears come. Outside the afternoon was warm and bright. Clara walked me to my car without speaking. Just before I opened the door, she handed me the final signed copy of the decree. You're free, she said. I looked at the papers, then at the courthouse steps, then at the sky. No, I said softly. I'm safe. That summer, I learned how many ordinary things can feel extraordinary when no one is taking pieces of you in secret. I bought peaches at the farmer's market without checking whether Matthias had made another unexplained withdrawal. I slept through the night without waking to review bank alerts. I invited my sister Clara over for dinner and cooked salmon the way Matthias had always claimed he hated. We ate it on the patio with cheap white wine and bare feet propped on the opposite chair. You seem different, my sister said. I am different. Better. I watched a sabia hop along the fence. More honest. That was the truest answer I had. I joined a weekend financial literacy program for women rebuilding after divorce. At first, I volunteered only because Clara suggested it might help someone. Then one Saturday morning, a woman about my age stayed after class with a folder clutched to her chest. My husband handles everything, she whispered. I knew that whisper. I knew the shame inside it. I pulled out a chair and sat with her for nearly an hour. We didn't fix her whole life that day, but we opened her first bank statement together. Sometimes freedom begins with a password only you know. In August, an envelope arrived from the court confirming Matthias's first repayment had been processed. The amount was smaller than what he owed, but it was real. I placed the check on my desk and stared at it for a long time. Then I deposited it into a new account labeled Garden Fund. By September, the backyard had changed completely. Raised beds, lavender, tomatoes, a small stone path leading to a wooden bench beneath the ipe tree. I hired a local carpenter to build the bench and when he asked what inscription I wanted carved into the back, I thought for several days. In the end, I chose 5 words. She chose herself and stayed. The first time I sat there alone, I cried. Not loudly, not painfully, just enough to honor the woman who had answered a cruel message with 2 calm words and then saved her own life, one decision at a time. Late one evening, as the air cooled and the first leaves began to turn, my phone vibrated on the patio table. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I opened the message. It was Mateus. Can we talk? No apology, no explanation, just another request. Another door he expected me to open because I had opened so many before. I stared at the screen. For a long moment, I remembered being 22 and believing love meant never giving up. Then I thought about being 45 and understanding something far more important. Love without respect becomes a debt you pay forever. I deleted the message. Then I blocked the number. The sky above my backyard had softened into deep blue. Somewhere nearby, wind moved through the ipe leaves. My house glowed behind me, warm and steady. Every lock changed, every room reclaimed. Mateus had thought he was leaving me with nothing. He never understood that what he took with him was the life I no longer wanted, and what he left behind was mine, my home, my money, my peace, my name. If this story touched something in you, maybe because you've been betrayed, used, or made to feel guilty for protecting yourself, I want you to remember this. Starting over is not failure. Sometimes it is the first honest thing you have done for yourself in years. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and let me know if you've ever had to choose yourself after someone took your kindness for weakness. Your story matters more than you think, and if you want more stories about strength, dignity, and second chances, subscribe and stay with us. We have many more journeys to share, and I would be honored to have you here for the next one.